Hi, I'm Sami Aaron with the Resilient Activist, and I've been interviewing people the last couple of days, people that we know are visionary activists. This is one of our new inspirations. And the thought came, well, maybe I should be interviewed to see where the Resilient Activist came from and how that visionary activist inspiration came about. So my good friend, Kathy Miller, she's been with me on this journey for a really long time and has agreed to interview me. So I'm deeply grateful. So Kathy, take it away.
Well, I'm excited to interview you, Sami, because I have been along on this journey since the inspiration and through the creation of the Resilient Activist and the development in its many twists and turns over the last 3 years. And I would also want to say how, just how impressed and how amazed I've been at all that you and those who've been involved with the Resilient Activists, all that's been accomplished in such a short amount of time, and how appreciative I am, and I know many people are, of those efforts and what a difference it makes in our world. So before we get into the heart of all of that, why don't you tell folks who don't know you as well as I do a little bit about your background and your family and anything that you think is important that has brought you to this point in your life?
Sure. So I'm in Kansas City, and I was a software developer for 35 years. It was my own company and just happened to be in the right place at the right time when microcomputers were coming into this world, and it was a great journey. I decided to shut that down in December of 2017 as I was starting the Resilient Activist. So I've retired from that. My family, my husband, although there's been a little eye rolling occasionally, is very supportive of most of what I do, even if he just doesn't even understand it or want to go there. My kids have always been really supportive too. So the Resilient Activist story kind of bubbled out of being an environmental activist myself and feeling really connected to nature, and so many years worth of trying to understand how to live my life that way. And I had that connection with my older son, who was an environmental activist. And the more that
Kevin.
Yeah, my son Kevin. The more that he understood about the implications of environmental destruction, the intersection of all the social injustices that go along with that, the depth and breadth of this problem globally, the less he felt like he was going to be able to make any difference. And in 2003, we lost him to suicide. There's been this sense, so it's, what year is this? 2020. In the year COVID, it's hard to picture what year this is. But so in these intervening years, there's just been this thing bubbling up out of me about what might have helped him and people like him who really care, who really want to make a difference for a healthy planet, social justice, equity, the love of all species. What do those people need to feel resilient and uplifted and hopeful? Because listening to the news can get you in a darker place. And I've just had great support from my husband, from my other son, Brian, and just kind of stepping into whatever I'm being led through to actually make this happen.
So how did you, after that inspiration came, because that was a number of years after Kevin's death, that this kind of all sort of started to gel, as I recall, how did you start to implement?
I think the first was finding my own peace, working through my own grief and trying to understand, because at the time I didn't have a deep understanding of how someone could be that distressed about what's happening on the planet, right? Like, how bad could it really be, were my thoughts. And other people are working on this. There's people around the globe working on deforestation and species extinction and clean air and clean water and all that. And I didn't truly understand the depth of the reality of what's happening in the world globally. So the first few years was really more about finding my own peace with my own grief and deep immersion into yoga, meditation, pranayama, which is yoga breathing practice, and lots of time spent in nature. And so it was like, as the grief would well up, and it was kind of this journey, over a number of years of some days just having to get out in nature, just like I couldn't think or concentrate on anything else. And I wanted to be alone, and I didn't care if I felt safe, and I just needed to be totally surrounded by the natural world. With the meditation and the yoga, it was so helpful for me to find, for some days it would just be, that would be the only time of day that would be of any peace, right? That I could just kind of stop the incessant thoughts. And I became a yoga and meditation teacher and started teaching pranayama practices. I started doing workshops dealing with grief and pain. There are so many amazing teachers that were teaching the uplifting, joyful classes, and that wasn't me during those years. I was like, bring me your grief, and I'll give you some tools that'll help you relax a little. So I taught workshops in healing your grieving heart. So that journey, as I delved more into the environment and climate change and global warming, and I became an extension master naturalist, which kind of helped solidify some of what I had been perceiving from my time spent in nature, just noticing things and trying to understand the relationship and the interconnectivity of everything out in nature, and how what humanity decides to do and the actions that they take and how that impacts all of that interconnectivity, how it totally changes our water flow and our temperature flow, and what gets absorbed in the soil, and what insects and critters can be there based on what humans do. And so taking the Extension Master Naturalist program really helped me to understand the big cycle of life picture. And I remember the day in one of the Master Naturalist training classes when I said to myself, oh, now I get the relationship between clean water and clean air and insects and pollination and fruit production and soil quality and erosion. And, I just went on and on and on. And so it was all these things together, right? It was the deep connection to nature, the deep grief release that came from nature. And I was teaching workshops and facilitator programs and helping people connect to nature deeply by that time. The scientific and historical understanding, the heartfelt and spiritual connection of the meditation and mindfulness practices. And so it all just kind of started coming together over about a 15-year period. And there was a day when I said, I feel like maybe I have enough tools in my toolbox right now. Actually, I call it a tool backpack so I could take it with me out to nature, that I could maybe offer some of these tools back to that original thought of what would support environmental activists, what would uplift them, what would give them. And I'll tell you, Kathy, one of the biggest learnings that I had, especially from my meditation practice and also from time spent in nature, was this understanding that I could hold grief and sorrow and the memory of all that in one hand, while I also could hold joy and uplift and beauty and new life and savoring of things, you know. And that was a very long learning path to recognize that I didn't have to be defined by grief, and I didn't have to put on rose-colored glasses in order to have joy, right?
Mm-hmm.
That I could embody both at the same time. And that was, there's one of the yoga practices that I kind of specialize in is yoga nidra, which is deep guided yoga sleep. And at the time when I learned it, there was nobody in Kansas City teaching it at all. I learned it when I was on retreat with my pranayama teacher. It's the most powerful relaxation technique ever. And in some of the schools, part of the visualization during that practice, and you're lying down the whole time. I mean, it's really deep relaxation. But
It's
part of
very
the
helpful.
yeah, you've been there.
Yeah.
Part of the practice is experiencing opposites. So in one breath, you might inhale and feel light and airy, and the out breath, you feel heavy and heavy, right? Or maybe in one breath, you feel cold, and the exhalation, you feel really hot. And so you practice embodying both sides of the same coin, both sides of temperature, both sides of weight, right? And so it was kind of that practice that brought me to this, can I embody both sides of, well, I wouldn't call it grief, I don't know what I call it, but where I can embody grief and joy at the same time, both sides of emotion, both sides of my peace of mind or something like that. So that was pretty wordy. Did I answer your question?
Sure you did, somewhere in there.
Okay.
So how has that learning translated into the resilient activists to help other people who, especially activists on the front line of environmental degradation, who are feeling grief and you know, just feel overwhelmed? How have you brought that to them?
It's interesting. So, you know, we're about almost 3 years old, and it took us a little while to really see, well, who is the audience? Who's ready to hear this message? And there were a number of environmental activists, friends of mine, who were not ready 2.5 years ago to hear this message. They did not want to be part of exploring their inner feelings about this. They just wanted to work all day, do as much good for the planet as they could, and then go home and forget about it. Like, right, just do other things. We're, in the meantime, what's happening is grief is being just held in the body and in the heart and in the mind. And so it was like, as I started to shift through, and our programming has adjusted a little bit,
Yes.
as we've made more and more connections over these couple of years. There's been a lot of new organizations coming up that were not in existence when we started. There was no drawdown groups in Kansas City, no Sunrise Movement. There wasn't an Extinction Rebellion movement. There was no conscious capitalism. There was, you know, all these amazing organizations that have bubbled up in the past about 1.5 or 2 years. They weren't here back then. So we were kind of feeling our way through that. And where we are now, Kathy, and it's really just came as this deep understanding about 2 months ago to me, was the two sides of the coin. So the one side is the resilient activist. This is the deep emotional uplift and support part of the program. And the other side is the visionary activist. This is the joy and the happiness and the can-do attitude, right? And it's the two together. We have to have both.
So the visionary activist is the new twist, because as you said, there have been other programs. I remember Enviro Tips was a big, you know, teaching people how to take care of their hornworms on their tomato plants.
Tomato hornworms, yeah.
Hornworms. I obviously didn't have no tomatoes at my house. You know, and other kinds of programming that has continued. But this latest really, I have sensed from you, is really exciting your heart. So who are you? You're doing interviews with people. Who are you hoping this will reach and inspire, and what are you hoping will be the outcome of doing these interviews?
Sure. First of all, doing these interviews uplifts me. So I've done 4 so far, and people from all different walks of life with all different ideas and approaches to what's, I'll call it their superpower, right? Like so many of us are born with just some gift that's just waiting to come out into the world. And for me, a big part of actually making this happen, like the day that I said, okay, I'm going to start, I'm not going to, I don't know when I'm going to start, but I know I have this thing that's bubbling up. I know that there's something coming out of me, and I contacted, so many people to get their opinion and hear their feedback. But it was like, the idea for the visionary activist was those people who were before they've already done it. So the people I'm interviewing are people who have taken the plunge. And even if that plunge took them years. So one of the interviews, and I'm not going to spoil it because they haven't been released yet, was a young man that for, I don't know, like 7 years, he worked his butt off just all day for days and days doing what he does. I'm not going to say. And it was like, why did you do that? What kept you going, that you knew this is what was yours to do? What kept you going? And his answer, he got real thoughtful, and his answer was, well, I guess it was the love. And I'm like, oh my gosh. That's so I'm interviewing people who've done it, coming from whatever their background is, in order to inspire those people who have that gift, but are in fear. Maybe they're still in the grief or the anger or the overwhelm, right? This is huge. This global environmental devastation it's been coming on us for centuries, right? As to how humanity has evolved, and especially certain societies in humanity have evolved to not live in harmony with nature, like it's what we've done. And so it's this sense that who am I as a nobody? Who am I as a software developer, for God's sakes, right?
Well, not only a software developer. Okay, go ahead.
But you know what I mean? It's like that in the back of our minds. So many people is, well, who am I to do this? I'm nobody. I don't have the money, or I'm in a situation where I can't make this. I don't know people. I'm not a public speaker. I'm not an artist. I'm not. And the visionary activist program is to show, yeah, but here's what you are. And within that is your own gift. And so we have the interviews to show it has been done by everyday people. And then we have upcoming programming that will it kind of follows my journey into bringing the resilient activist to life. So at the moment when I felt that I had my toolbox was full, right? My heart was open. I didn't feel I was operating out of deep grief anymore, right? I was operating out of joy. I was operating out of this understanding of holding both sides of that emotion, and seeing and knowing how good it felt to do something, how good it felt to become a master naturalist, how good it felt to be involved in the restoration of a toxic waste Superfund site that became a pollinator prairie, right? How good it felt to take that action, and to know that whatever action I took was really of great value, even if it was really small. And so that's the audience for the Resilient Activist. And the training then, so we'll have on Giving Tuesday, everyone who donates between now and Giving Tuesday will receive a PDF of just some simple steps on how to become a visionary activist. And then they'll be invited to a 2-hour workshop where we'll take that a little deeper. And then the goal for next year is to develop programming that will really be basically how I became the Resilient Activist and how it started. And it's in combination of deep mindfulness practices, deep journaling, introspection, deep time in nature, and noticing and communing with the patterns, the cycles, the deep knowledge of what we can learn by just observing and witnessing. So this tree behind me, for example, it's a real tree. It's a tree in Olathe, Kansas. It's out behind the Olathe Community Center. It's this big old oak tree. It's 90 feet across. If you were to walk from the tip of that branch to the tip of that branch, it's this humongous tree. And I've spent so much time out there just conversing with this tree. And you can call it woo-woo, you know, you can call it, oh my God, she's a tree hugger. You can just have a conversation. What if you could speak to that tree and what would it tell you? And so this Visionary Activist program is taking all of that along with who do you connect to for small business advice, right? Who do you connect to for funding? Who's in your circle? So when I decided I was ready, and I know, Kathy, you were involved in helping me make that decision, I went through my contact list. I had my software development contact list. I had my yoga teacher contact list and students and other yoga teachers. And I had my personal list. And I had 3 criteria, right? I wanted people to come to a focus group meeting, and I only wanted people who met these 3 criteria. First, they had to have a deep connection to nature in whatever way. Second, they needed to either give or receive some holistic practice. Could have been anything, but someone who knew that we don't just live from our brains, right? We live from a more spiritual perspective. And the third criteria, I had to like them. I had to enjoy their company.
I'm so glad I qualified.
And you were first on the list. And, you know, I wanted people whose opinion I would respect and people that I knew would say to me, are you just nuts? You know, like, don't do that or whatever. That would give me their honest opinion. Kathy, I had 60 people on that list.
And you called almost all of them personally, as I recall.
I called all of them personally.
Amazing act of believing that this was possible. Yeah.
Yeah. And then I had 2 focus groups at 2 different times early in 2018 and had 45 people come to those. And the focus groups were, here's my background. Here's me as a business person. Here's me as a master naturalist. Here's me as a meditation yoga teacher. Like, here's me. Here's my heart. Here's what I want to bring to the world. Are you with me? Right? Mm-hmm. And just who wants to join me? Because I had no idea what this would look like. Mm-hmm. That's the visionary activism. Like that, my acts embody the teachings of how to be a visionary activist, how to bring that out for yourself in your own unique way. So that's the new program.
Yeah, that's pretty exciting. So there are a lot of people over this time who I have listened to say to you, I don't really think I'm an activist. How do you respond to that question?
Yeah, I think the word activist has gotten a bad rap.
Yeah.
You know, we think, you know, power fists and fighting the man. And, you know, I can go back to the 60s. I'm old enough. Although I was really young in the 60s, but I could get that. Activism to me is the art of taking action to bring forth what's bubbling up from your heart. That's
a wonderful, yeah, that's a great and a less threatening description. Yeah.
Yeah. And I can see someone as an activist, first of all, from wherever they are. So for some people, it means committing to recycling. That might be, you know what, I care about this. I've heard a little bit about landfills filling up and, you know, methane gas and, you know, and I can recycle. And so that's an act of activism, right? There's other people that their activism is lobbying their elected officials. Some people are attorneys who are suing people. Some people are getting in and doing restoration work or habitat protection, or, you know, it's such a broad topic that activism is any act, in my opinion, of stepping in and taking action to benefit others, to bring joy, kindness, compassion, coming from a deeper understanding of how all that's interconnected and how everything, let's go this way. If I'm an activist who's angry, and I'm an activist who is constantly thinking about how I can stop those people and what those people are doing and how awful they are and the destruction that they're causing, even just saying those things, my chest is tight, my forehead is wrinkled, my hands are clenched, and this is how I live if I'm that kind of activist. And that's the typical definition of an activist, someone who's angry, right? Yeah. Someone that's us versus them, someone who's at war. To me, a resilient activist is someone who says, I get all of these things. These may all be truths, right? People may have done stuff that's just horrendous to the environment or to other people or for profit or whatever. It's not, like I said, it's not putting on the rose-colored glasses. It's reading, it's understanding, it's educating yourself about the issues. That's why I chose to go to the Climate Reality Leadership Training, which was Al Gore's program. And that was about a year into the Resilient Activists that I chose to do that. I felt like there was more from a global level. And so there were 2,000 people there from all over the world who had something bubbling out of them, that they understood something about what was happening with the climate, with the earth, with temperature rise and sea level rise. They had to step into activism, right? And so I needed to know more. I needed to hear people's real stories, you know, people who live on, you know, near the Marshall Islands or some little island that's gradually going to be underwater, and, you know, people experiencing severe weather events. And so it's not putting on rose-colored glasses. It's knowing with pragmatism and a deep mindfulness practice how I can read these gut heart-wrenching stories and statistics and still be in a place of equanimity, going, oh, this is important information for me to know. And I can work through grief or secondary trauma that might come out of my knowing those facts through my toolbox, right? Through my meditation, my relaxation, my time in nature. And then I can step back kind of in the witness mode, which is part of that meditation practice, and say, with all that, what is mine to do? And what will feel resilient for me to do it? So it's not like you don't get angry. It's not like you don't try and make a difference. It's not like you just shy away from the news or bury your head in the sand. It's that you embrace all of it and just step into what feels right for you. And I just want to say something. So I'm in a position financially. I live in a beautiful home. I have the support of my family, my husband. I have enough funds to live a comfortable life. I'm not working, you know, I don't have a job I have to go to, and I'm not raising a family. And I'm in a position, deeply grateful for that, where I can do a whole lot. Like this is the time in my life, right, where I can do a whole lot of things because I'm able to. Others who are in a different position, family to care for, financial
Sure.
difficulties, maybe not living in a place that feels safe and comfortable, whatever, everybody can just, in my opinion, start with exactly where they are, recognizing what they need to feel safe and comfortable and nurtured within the scope of meditation practice, and then decide, okay, I can allocate 1 hour a week to doing something that's going to make me feel good. And so I want to talk about the Enviro tips. So for example, you mentioned that, Kathy. The Enviro tips were these full circle teachings that I just had to get out of me. And it was so the Enviro tips are articles, teachings about different actions that people can take. And our early audiences were the general public, people who would not say, well, I'm an activist, right? Or would not even want to be an activist, right? They would just say, I care and I want to do the right thing, and I want to do it the right way as far as in the environment. So the tomato hornworm story, I think it's like showing them the love or something like that in the title. I can't remember. It was the first one that I wrote. And it was this concept that if you want to grow tomatoes in your yard and you have tomato hornworms who are delighted that you're growing tomato plants in their yard because that's what they feed on, right? And you go to the internet and you research how to control tomato hornworms, I promise you there will be no articles that tell you how to control them without killing them.
Yes.
Right. And I had people tell me stories about it's our most popular blog post. It's Enviro tip number 1. Yeah. And I have people tell me stories. Yeah, I was raised that when they hit your tomato crop, you take a little basket and scissors out in your yard and you cut them literally in half and let them drop in the basket. Right. People had all kinds of ways that they were taught to kill tomato hornworms. So near the end of this whole article about respect all life and honoring the life of that tomato hornworm, there's a little video of a hummingbird moth. And it's beautiful. It's kind of pink and white and brown little stripes. And it's got this 10-inch tongue that goes in and can get nectar from really those tubular kind of blossoms, you know. And I had this little video. There was one out in my yard. And what we don't know, we're never taught, is if you let that tomato hornworm grow to maturity, it becomes the hummingbird moth. And it was like, this is the lesson. This is what we're not taught, these things. And so that cycle of life, right, that I got it that day that the light bulb went off in my mind was, you can be an activist by planting a bunch of tomato seeds way out in the back of your yard, right? When the tomato hornworm shows up on your good tomato plants, pick them off, put them in a basket, or cut the stem off. If you don't want to touch them, cut the stem off the tomato plant, carry the whole thing over to these other plants and let them live their lives, right?
Show a little love. Show a little love.
Yeah. So that's activism. I could do long answers on everything. Next.
Well, I guess another little tidbit that I remember probably reading from the blog or listening to you, when people feel like what, what could I do that can possibly make a difference? I think you tell the story, the bee story, about how much honeybees, how little amount of honey they actually collect in their lifetime, and what, can you tell that story?
Yeah, of course, you caught me without knowing the exact measurements, but something like
I think it's 1/12.
1/12 of a teaspoon in their lifetime. And so, yeah, you think about, so my sister and brother-in-law are beekeepers, and they're at the farmers market, and they sell a lot of honey. People love honey, and they buy it by the gallon sometimes, right? And sometimes more than 1 gallon a year. And so you look at one individual bee who's born to do just what they're born to do. So you have the queen bee, and you have the drones, and you have the worker bees, and you have some bees that their job is to fly off and be the scouts and find honey, right? Find nectar sources, and then come back and report to the rest of their hive. If you go 6 degrees here and the sun's shining at this angle and whatever, they do this waggle dance that informs the other bees where they found a great patch of blossoms where they can get nectar. And then there's those that go and collect the nectar and the pollen and bring it back to the hive. And there's those that their only role is to take care of the eggs as they're laid, or to nurture the larvae as they mature in the hive. And so each one of these, and there'll be thousands of bees inside one hive, thousands. Each one of them just does their teeny tiny bit, and they produce not only enough honey for themselves, but enough honey to share. And it's like, it's the same thing on the planet here with humans. Each one of us has our superpower, has our gift just ready to be nurtured. And here's to me where time spent in nature and time spent in meditation can shift how we perceive our gift. I think a lot of times we're born with a gift that our parents, immediate family, teachers, friends look at and say, are you nuts? Like, don't act like that. Don't be that person. That's not how we live. That's not how our culture lives. That's, and we're taught so many times to downplay and even suppress what's really bubbling out of us. So many people.
Our gifts.
Yeah. And it's like, someone who can't carry a tune, but they love to sing. And the choir teacher invites them to do the chimes. It's like, oh my gosh, that person may have had the craziest voice. And look at how many unique music voices there are out there. And so a meditation practice can really help with the journaling. Part of the visionary activist tool is, what are my gifts? What brings me just absolute joy to do? Why don't I do that anymore if I don't, right? How did that start? And is it something that I can let society's ideas of what I'm supposed to be doing go, and just find the way to bring that out, right? So
if we do our 1/12 in our hive, that can make a difference.
Absolutely. Yeah. So if we think about, let's take flooding, for example, because, flooding is a great topic. So here in the Kansas City area, every spring, there's torrential flooding that happens down south of here. So around Joplin area, southern Missouri, right, where the water will stand for months. And there's always so much destruction to farmland, to property. Chemicals get washed down from manufacturing sites. And so it's this really difficult flooding situation. So when you look at where that flooding comes from, a lot of that comes from the greater Kansas City area, because of all the property that has been either paved over or planted with grass, which is non-native grass, which has roots that are, 3 or 4 inches deep, that can't absorb a heavy rainfall. And so if you take a look at, you start with your own property. So the 1B, right? You got the 1B and your one property. And if you could get a drone looking up at your house, above your house and your property, and you see the amount of space that your rooftop takes up, that your driveway takes up, that your mowed grass takes up, just that much, your own land, right? When there's a 5-inch rainfall, where does that water go? Well, it all goes down into our stormwater system, right? And that flows down, and it's every one of these homes, every corporate office park, it's every big box store and the parking lots that go with it. And all it's one house at a time and spread over this glorious metropolis. And that's what causes flooding down in southern Missouri.
We don't think about that at all.
No, that's the B. That's the 1B. So if I, as one sweet bee, decide to remove a whole bunch of my grass and put in native plants, which absorb the water in a rainfall, which filter out chemicals in a rainfall in the ground, right, before that water flows off, which provide pollinator habitats, whole different story. Let's stick with water here. If I put in rain barrels to capture that water coming off of my rooftop, and I can use that water, in a 1-inch rainfall, you can have in a 1,000 square foot roof, that can produce 600 gallons of water, 600 gallons of water, right, in one rainfall. So if I can bring that water and leave it on my property, that's 1/12 of a teaspoon less water that's going to be headed down to southern Missouri.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Well, I have at least one other topic that I know is dear to your heart that has been important with Resilient Activist and now with this new effort, and that is community. And I think if you spoke a little bit about that, how important that has been and is for people to be able to do, resilient activist kind of work. Can you say something?
That really touches, Kathy, on, the two sides of the coin. So we've been talking a lot about the visionary activist. The community part is the resiliency, the resilient activist. And we're in the midst of a research study through the psychology department at the University of Kansas. And we had focus groups in September this year. Small groups, 2 to 5 people in a group being interviewed. Those people pretty much identified as environmental activists. So we had 46 people, and on a scale of -3 to where I don't care about the environment to +3, I live my life thinking about and worrying about climate change and environmental destruction. On that scale, our 46 people, the mean was 2.67. So these are people who would say, yes, I'm an environmental activist, right?
Mm-hmm.
That was our group, our focus groups. And during these focus groups, they're being recorded. Grad students in the psychology department at KU are transcribing them. They'll be run through I can't wait to see what kind of digital algorithms to pull out word usage and statistics on what people said. One of the main things, and so there were note takers. So I don't have the actual data, but there were note takers at each of these sessions, and I have those people's notes. And our team has collated them and kind of categorized what people said. One of the main themes that came out of those focus groups was gratitude that they found a community of people that heard their hearts. Mm-hmm. And I'll choke up thinking about it, because It is really hard to be an environmental activist in a community of people that don't get it.
Yeah.
And even within a community of people that do get it, but who are choosing not to be as strong an activist as you are. So it's a constant, do I say something? Do I, and I'll give you just a really heartfelt example. And I'm putting this on this video. I've never shared this particular scene with anybody else. I've carried it in my heart. I was on a trip with two of my very closest friends. Dear, dear friends. We were in a beautiful place together in nature. And we were on a glorious creek bed and this bubbling brook and the sounds and the nature around. It was really glorious. And there were these cairns, C-A-I-R-N-S, where people stack rocks, right? And you see it in all the really beautiful promotional images for meditation teachers and retreats, right? On the water, and here's these stacked rocks. And my friends were totally enamored of them, right? And one started making her own little stack. And as we looked around, they were everywhere, up and down in the river, on the sides, on the shoreline, everywhere, next to the path. They were everywhere. And my heart was so heavy because that's habitat destruction. That humanity thinking that this is a cool, glorious thing, and I have the right as a human to move these rocks. I can put them in whatever configuration I think is cool. I can walk in and destroy habitat for all the fish, all the critters, crawdads and toads and everybody that's in this water. The erosion happening along the sides, the edge of the river, because of this habitat destruction. And I've lived with not sharing this because my friends were in such joy, right? And so there's this, God, give me a community of people that I can share this grief with.
Mm.
Am I always the Debbie Downer? You know, am I always the one to say, well, could you order that and ask them not to put in napkins and plastic silverware? And, you know, I don't want a straw. Like, do I have to always be that person?
Yeah.
And God, I must be awful to live with. And I've heard that from people before. We live with that. That 2.67, those people who identified on the 2.67 level of being an environmental activist, that's our lives. Every moment we have to decide, how much of this do I share? How much of a downer am I at a party where everybody's using paper plates and they say, but Sammy's got a real plate. I say, we brought out a real plate for you at our picnic and we'll wash it, right? And it's like, this is a hard life.
Mm-hmm.
Being in community, Kathy, that's what it's about. And that's what the Resilient Activist program coming out of this study at KU is 100% building community with all those resilience tools that I've talked about.
Mm-hmm.
The visionary activist is just bring it on, right? Get it out there, get it out there. And the resilient activist is, and here's a community to help support you. Here's mental health professionals and meditation and yoga and nature-connected tools that will help keep you inspired and joyful, and especially feel supported during those times when you're in complete pushback. Yeah.
Well, thank you for sharing that heartfelt story. Yeah, I know this is big time challenge for you all the time. I do. I recognize that a lot. So that would have been one of your most personally difficult times, it sounds like, in this process. So was there some unexpected, maybe probably more than one, but an unexpected joy that came out of nowhere that surprised you, that that you also carry in your heart along with harder things?
Yeah, and it has nothing to do with the environment. It has a lot to do with community. I had done some interviews early on. I did one with Tree Sisters,
Yes.
amazing organization. And I had someone contact me just a day or so after that was released, who said, I've never contacted a total stranger before. However, there was something about your interview that just inspired me. And this is someone who doesn't live anywhere near Kansas City. And she's become my spiritual mentor. I'll just say that, my deep spiritual mentor. And what was funny was one of the things, and we've talked about this since, and I've had other people bubble up gifting me their gifts. Yeah. So this is a gift supporting me. I have an energy
whole process.
Yeah, the whole thing. I have an energy worker supporting me here, and someone who's starting an energetic, spiritually based business consulting company supporting me. Like people have just bubbled up. I had an artist contact me. He's one of the people on the interview that just said, I don't know, but I want to use my art to support the resilient activists. It's like people just bubble up. Yeah. But one of the things on the interview that my friend and my mentor, my spiritual mentor, mentioned, and I just want to share it because I haven't thought about it in a long time, but I'm a real good letter writer. And so I used to write letters to our local nurseries here, giving them my reasons why they should quit selling neonicotinoid chemicals because of the harm that they're doing on the planet. And I had one almost published in a magazine, a local gardening magazine, but the owner of the magazine was like, well, you're sending this to all of my advertisers. I can't publish this article. And okie doke, that's who you are. But I'd written some letters, love letters, to the Koch brothers, David and Charles Koch. And those of you who may or may not know them, they're very wealthy. David is passed now. Charles is still alive. Huge corporation, really big in things like oil, pipelines, all kinds of energy production. And typically they're very vilified within the environmental activist community, right? I personally, so having been part of the beginnings of the Symphony in the Flint Hills organization and glorious group here in the Tallgrass area in Kansas, I remember when I saw the program that the Koch brothers were one of the big funders. And that was one of my letters that I wrote. Seriously, do you want to take their money? So I said, I'm a good letter writer. So there was this day, this is well before the Resilient Activist, when I thought to myself, I had really learned more and more about the great garbage patch, I forget what they call it, out in the ocean, right? And where it's like these gyres of trash, mostly plastic, out in the ocean. There's about 5 of them, and they've one bigger than the state of Texas. And it's where all the trash from all of our coastlines that gets swept away in all of our severe weather events, all our plastic and other man-made things end up in the ocean. And it's awful. And I had this bright idea that, it would take a company with bazillions of dollars and some leaders that can make stuff happen, decision makers who have thousands of employees and all kinds of equipment and manpower. And someone like that could go clean up the garbage patches in the ocean. And I says to myself, The Koch brothers could do that. They could just turn away from what they've been doing, could still make a lot of money, right? You take all that plastic and recycle it into something, and, plus all the do good blue sky advertising, like that would be really cool. And so I started writing them love letters. And, they never replied, but I would write to them and I would compliment them on their accomplishments and their power and their intelligence and all they've been able to accomplish, and just invite them. I would introduce one little topic about why this is so important to me and the good they could do in the world. And so it was like, it felt so much better than being the one to write letters and telling them what not to do and how they're destroying and how awful they are and suing them and being at war with them. Because in any moment, whether in my lifetime or theirs, that company could choose to just shift. Like, you know what? We're tired of the lawsuits on the Keystone XL pipeline, right? Let's just quit that, be done with it. Let's go do this. That, to me, that's a visionary, resilient activist, right? It's like, let's just bring it all together. And anyway, that's that story.
Well, that's a great story. And it brought joy to you instead of a lot of angst that writing angry letters. So, well, I mean, I think we all know what we love, that's what we save. So
exactly.
When you love the planet, you do the things that bring you joy to save it.
Right. Yeah.
All right, sweet Sami, you get one more shot. What have you not been able to say yet that you think would be important, especially for people who might be budding visionary activists? What encouragement or inspiration might you leave for them?
The word that's bubbling out of me is overwhelm. And how heavy that can feel, and how stifling overwhelm can feel. I think that was a long practice for me. That was many years of understanding the overwhelm and understanding how that one little first step, even if it didn't make other people happy, was the only way for me to feel resilient. It was a decision. I studied a lot with a meditation teacher, Ajashanti, and I remember him talking about living from your truth and the clarity that brings you. And the day I decided I was going to quit pussyfooting around being an environmentalist, the day I was going to start carrying my own silverware and napkin in my purse, and the day I was going to speak up and stop the waiter from putting a water with a straw in it, I was stopping before they got to my table. Because once it's sat down, they can't take it back. It was the day I took that overwhelm and just said, I need to live the only way I'm going to survive this happily is to live in my truth. And so I guess that was a really clear moment of clarity. When you have a deep meditation practice, every once in a while, there's an insight that you're like, oh, I get it. That living from truth in light of overwhelm, that was the moment of clarity. And so I think that's what I would offer people is find the tools, whether it's through the visionary activist, through the resilient activist, whether it's through your own teachers, your own spiritual advisors, your own deep time spent in nature. Get down and hone into what is your moment of clarity? What do you have to do in order to really embody your truth? And from there, you'll begin to know what the next steps are for you. So it doesn't start with activism. It starts, it has to bubble up from the inside. And you'll know if it's right because it feels good. You'll know if it's someone else's idea if you go, okay, I can do that, and you're scrunched in. Fine, I hear you. I'm a really good yada yada, and so I have to stick with that the rest of my life, right? As opposed to, oh, if I do this thing, you know, the heart is open, the breath is calm, the face is calm. There's none of this. Okay, and then I'll do that. And then I have to, you know, if you look at your body's reaction and your breath's reaction, it just feels good. And that's the clarity that will just guide everything else when you choose to honor and live from your truth. This is not easy. I'm not saying it's easy, but it sure feels good.
Well, this has been delightful and so inspiring and informative, Sami. I hope other people will enjoy watching and listening to you and take inspiration from this visit for their own path.
Thank you, Kathy. I just appreciate your kindness, your connection, and your ability. You know, these are real different questions than I've been asking people, you know, with my checklist. And, you know, and I'm grateful for your heart, and I'm grateful for your support over all these years.
My joy.
See ya.
Later.